Hello and welcome. The Palestinian landscape seems to have changed overnight, and the rocky path through it is making many nervous. The ongoing disagreements between Fatah and the Hamas parties is no particular surprise, except perhaps the ferocity of the gunfights between them in recent months. But the sudden defeat of Fatah in the entire Gaza Strip, replaced by Hamas, has sent shockwaves throughout the international community. Western powers have rushed to the aid of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who dissolved the national unity government and established an emergency government with no Hamas participation. But that has created its own complications. Almost pushed to one side is the Palestinian situation with Israel. Now, don't forget, if you want to discuss the issues at stake here, we have your phone calls and mobile phone texts on this program. The numbers are there at the bottom of your screen now. Well, joining me are Ghada Karmi, a Palestinian writer and academic living in London. In her latest book, she deals with ways to end the Arab-Israeli conflict that go beyond the conventional thinking. Married to Another Man, Israel's Dilemma and the One-State Solution was released last month. Well, Dr. Karmi is a research fellow and lecturer at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. And in Jerusalem, Dr. Sari Nusseibeh, the president of Al-Quds University, where he also teaches philosophy. Previously, he served as the Palestinian National Authority representative in Jerusalem. Dr. Nusseibeh's recent autobiography, Once Upon a Country, A Palestinian Life, chronicles the modern history of the Palestinian struggle, as well as Dr. Nusseibeh's life as an academic and political activist. I welcome both of you. And Dr. Sari Nusseibeh in Jerusalem, I want to start off with you. There's actually apparently a joke going around among Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and the occupied territories, saying that when they talked about a two-state solution, they didn't mean two separate states between Palestinians. Of course, very dark humor there. But I wonder, has it reached that stage that the Palestinians themselves have found a situation where there is so much division they have no other choice?
Well, I think we did have a choice, but unfortunately, I believe that there was some mismanagement in on both parts, on both sides, or by both parties, and so we ended up where we are today, with two governments and one president, and each government, that's to say, the government that was originally there, claiming President Abbas as a legitimate president. But with President Abbas only claiming that one party or one government is legitimate and the other is not, which is a rather sort of confusing situation for most people, for ordinary Palestinians. I think it's also confusing for the people in power.
I want to get to Dr. Ghada Karmi with an email that we got, actually, because we had a lot of viewers obviously wanting to take part with questions here. And Dr. Ghada, if I could put this to you from Tom Miller in California in the United States. And Tom says, had the US and Israel been open to recognizing Hamas as the democratically elected representatives of the Palestinians, the current situation probably could have been avoided. Instead, they threw fuel on the fire by refusing to deal with Hamas and cutting off funding, contributing to the current crisis. And this policy of selective democracy is the height of hypocrisy. Will your comments on that, please, ma'am?
I think that Tom Miller is absolutely right. This crisis was absolutely inevitable and could have been predicted from the moment that the United States, Israel and the European Union refused to work with and recognize a democratically elected government in the Palestinian territories, and they paved the way for the present crisis. And quite honestly, I'll tell you, one of the things that's most disturbing about this is the way that the discussion is now focused on differences between Hamas and Fatah. You know, these people are wrong, those people are right, they shouldn't be behaving like this. This diverts attention from the real problem here, which is the behavior of the so-called international community with regard to the Palestinians. They have been instrumental in bringing about what looked to Hamas to be an attempted coup against an elected government by Fatah, and Hamas reacted to that. Now, you don't get that reported. What you get is that these two sides aren't getting on, and oh dear, and why don't they work together, and now we've got a big problem, and so on.
Well, let's get Anwar on the line from London. We have a caller on. And Anwar, your question, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Riz.
Walaikum salam.
My question is very short and very brief and to the point, and that is that why is it that Hamas was elected democratically by the majority of the Palestinian people in the West Bank and in Gaza? That's one point. Keep that in mind. And since then, the American, the Israel, and the EEC have gradually turned against Hamas, because the only claim from Hamas was that we need a Palestinian state. We want to go back to 1967, which the UN also agreed in the past, and passed the resolutions.
Okay, Anwar, what I'm going to do is put that to Dr. Sari Nusseibeh there in Jerusalem, and I guess that touches on the email we had as well, where there was criticism of hypocrisy by the United States. And I wonder, from your perspective, sir, where does this leave the goal of trying to reach 1967 borders when it comes to a resolution for the Palestinians?
Well, I think that the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the basis of the 67 borders is now now further away than it's ever been. And I think one should look at different scenarios, different possibilities for the future. But to go back one or two steps, I think your viewers are right. The election of Hamas was engaged in. It was done democratically, and of course the international community should have recognized Hamas as a government, as an elected government. But even more importantly, I think that and I say this with some agitation, because I personally am a supporter of Fatah. But even as I was saying, more importantly, I think Fatah should have also recognized the election of Hamas, and the fact that Hamas has won democratic elections and should have been, in fact, allowed to rule, or given free rein to rule. But this was not to be. Neither the international community, unfortunately, nor, on the other hand, various sections or individuals or parties within Fatah did not want to give that rein of rule to Hamas. Thus, we got slowly pushed into this contention, this confrontation, leading to the violence. And as we look again to the future, as you were saying earlier, I believe that we are further away from achieving a solution now than we ever were. Certainly, as far as the Palestinian government, even as far as President Abbas is concerned, I think his negotiating position with regard to Israel is far worse, far weaker now than it was, say, a few years ago. And certainly, we are in a far weaker position in negotiation terms than when President Arafat, was alive negotiating at Camp David.
I'd like to ask Dr. Ghader Karmi, with the United States and European Union now deciding directly to fund the Palestinian Authority after refusing to do that since the January 2000 elections, I wonder, to what extent does this, obviously this is relief for the Palestinians in terms of the economic situation and the polite day-to-day, but how much does this hurt the credibility of Abu Mazen, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, when it comes to trying to get some kind of legitimacy to his government and also trying to get the Palestinians behind him? Does he appear as a puppet?
Well, this move on the part of the United States and the European Union, belated move to actually provide help and aid to the Palestinians, which should have happened 18 months ago, is really fairly disastrous, because what it does is it underlines the fact that they want to divide and rule, that by supporting one faction against another, this is a recipe for certain recipe for conflict, and of course, President Abbas was undermined a long time ago, because when he was elected, he wasn't in fact given the support that he needed. Israel ignored him, and it was only after the Hamas government was elected that suddenly he was rescued from obscurity, and everybody started to woo this poor man. Now, of course he has very little credibility, and if he proceeds along the path of going along with this US-Israel move, then he will further erode what very little popularity that he has. And your earlier caller, who pointed to the fact of a large number of people voting for Hamas in 2006, is absolutely right to raise the fact that this was significant. There is a lot of support for Hamas. It's still there, and there'll be even more support now, because it is unfair. What's happened against Hamas is unfair. People can see that. They will therefore not like it. There will be further conflict. There will be further chaos. And you know, what is so depressing is that the elephant in the room, that is the Israeli occupation, now doesn't get a mention. We forget that Israel is actually occupying all these territories illegally, that Israel has shut them off from each other, thus making the division of the West Bank from Gaza much easier now than it would have been otherwise, and that it is Israel that has to be tackled, not the Hamas government or the disagreements between Fatah and Hamas.
Before I get to our caller in Italy, let's just quickly look at the map of the West Bank released 2 weeks ago by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Now, it shows that the 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank are confined to a dozen or so, dozens of enclaves separated by Israeli roads, settlements, fences, and so on. And I wonder, Dr. Sadi Nusseibeh, with more than 40% of the West Bank itself off limits to Palestinians, what's left for them?
Well, at the moment, as you just mentioned, we don't really have anything, and you should also not forget that East Jerusalem is part of this area which is under occupation, and very often people forget that East Jerusalem is part of this area, and it is under occupation. And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any area at all, any room at all for creating a state in the West Bank itself, or in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So I think if we want to have peace, we certainly have to go back all the way to the 1967 borders, and certainly looking at what's happening in the occupied territories in terms of what the Israelis are doing, that doesn't seem to be at the moment very realistic to expect. But you know, quite apart from this, quite apart from our conflict with Israel, and I quite agree with Rada about the elephant being this occupation, I think, you know, it is also time for us Palestinians and Arabs and in particular the political parties that exist in Palestine to take a look at ourselves and, you know, discuss what it is that we're doing to each other, whether we've managed our affairs properly, whether we've mismanaged. There's certainly a lot of blame to be handed around, but I think we should also be self-critical because after all, if we want to build a state, it should be in order to uphold some values, and it is not values that we saw being upheld in Gaza in the fighting that took place, you know, with Hamas, in spite of its being democratically elected. But the way that the militants were behaving with the civilians, I don't think is a way that can you know bear well for the future.
We've got Saleh on the line from Saudi Arabia. Good to hear from the Royal Saudi Kingdom. Go ahead, Saleh.
Hello, Khan.
Hi.
Hello, Khan. This is. I'd like to really share with you a theme that has been happening starting from Algeria, when the Islamist or Islamic groups were winning the election, to moving to Palestine when Hamas won, going to Somalia just a few months ago when there seems to be some party that's capable of maybe moving the country towards some kind of stability, and there's always America and the West standing there, basically dictating to us who should rule us. And that's the height of, to me, what really infuriates me is the racism of it. Is they want to decide to us who rules us and who isn't, and most often their choices, of course, corrupt regimes that actually take the Western interest in the Western interest before their people.
Well, let's get that to Dr. Ghada Karmi and ask. I mean, this is one of the issues. President George Bush initially said, you know, he had a hands-off approach to the Palestinians. Of course, I wonder how much that, taking into light what our caller just said now, how much that's hurt the credibility of the USA as a negotiator, as someone who can actually find a solution now.
Well, I don't think the USA has much credibility at all with the Palestinians, or indeed with the Arab world. So I don't think there's a terrific loss there. And your caller from Saudi Arabia is, of course, spot on, because the parallel with Algeria is particularly good, in that when there were democratic elections in Algeria and the FIS, the Islamist party, won a large number of votes, the president very unwisely dissolved the whole thing and brought in the army. And of course, we've had a disaster in Algeria ever since. And that is what is going to happen in the Palestinian areas. If this kind of double-dealing, hypocrisy, double standards continues. Now, the best thing really that the Palestinians can do, and I agree with Sari here, that of course we need to examine our own behavior, and of course it's very regrettable, the kind of, the excessive violence that we saw in Gaza. But we need to understand that we are pawns, we have been played with, we are pawns in a game not of our own making, and therefore, unless we actually ourselves are aware of this danger, and that includes the present leadership, it includes President Abbas and the people around him, ought to understand that the way to get out of this mess is not to obey orders as given by the United States, but to actually get together and solve this crisis together.
We've got less than a minute, so Shami is on the line from Ramallah, and good to hear from Ramallah. Shami, a quick question or comment with very little time, I'm afraid.
Just one short question to Ghada. Ghada, are you aware of the atrocities which Hamas has committed in Gaza Strip, and why you think Fatah has been so tolerant in the West Bank towards the people of Gaza? Do you know the nice house of Nabil Sha'ath, which you have visited in Gaza, has now been burned down by Hamas?
A quick answer, Shami, a quick answer from Dr. Ghada.
I'm aware that there's been excessive violence. I understand it. I do not excuse it, but I understand its causes. And the way to end it is to open the prisons that Israel has created for the Palestinians, to let in some air so that people can behave normally and can regain a normal life and not behave in this reprehensible way, which you very well described.
Well, Dr. Ghada Khalmi and Dr. Sari Nusseibeh, thank you very much for joining us there from London and Jerusalem, respectively. And don't forget, you, our viewers, if you have any thoughts about pressing issues such as this or others around the world, you can contact us with your questions and comments in advance by sending emails to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll, of course, see you next time. Don't forget, Street Talk is coming up next.